The crowd's energy was electric that Sunday morning. Thousands had gathered under the massive revival tent, their eyes fixed on the stage where Benny Hinn, the legendary evangelist, moved with the confidence of a man used to commanding attention. His voice echoed across the hall as he prayed over every hand raised, every tearful face, every hopeful heart. Candles flickered and the scent of incense filled the air. For most, this was a normal day of faith, miracles, and inspiration. But that calm, familiar rhythm shattered the moment Clint Eastwood stepped quietly through the crowd. No fanfare, no cameras flashing. No one expected Hollywood's toughest, most stoic icon to enter a place of worship. He moved slowly, deliberately, carrying nothing but a small Bible in his hand and an expression of calm purpose on his face. The murmurs began almost instantly, rippling through the audience like a wave. "Is that Clint Eastwood?" Someone whispered. "Is he really here?" Another voice said. Benny Hinn paused mid-step, sensing the change in energy before he even looked up. The preacher, who had seen countless faces in the crowd, who had spoken to presidents, kings, and world leaders, felt a subtle shift, something he could not explain. Eastwood approached the stage with a quiet authority. His eyes scanned the room but finally settled on Benny. There was no aggression, no ego, no pretense, only a calm, unshakable presence. The crowd leaned in instinctively, sensing something extraordinary was about to happen. Cameras clicked, cell phones were raised, and the whispers grew into an almost tangible tension. Finally, Clint spoke, his voice low but steady. "Brother, I have a message. Not from me, but from him above." The words hung in the air like an electric charge. Benny's confident smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of curiosity and, perhaps, unease. The audience didn't yet understand, but they could feel it. A moment was coming that would break through ordinary reality, a story that would be remembered forever. Clint Eastwood, a man known for his toughness on screen, had stepped into this sacred space, and the atmosphere shifted in a way that no one present would ever forget. And then, seconds later, what he whispered next, what Jesus told him to say, would change everything. Benny Hinn, the man who had inspired millions, would suddenly become part of a lesson far greater than any sermon he had ever given. The revival tent buzzed with energy, a living, breathing organism made of faith, expectation, and devotion. Sunlight streamed through the canvas, casting golden beams on the sea of faces. Thousands had gathered that morning, hoping to witness miracles, to hear words that could lift the heaviest burdens. Benny Hinn, in his usual commanding style, was the heartbeat of the event, moving across the stage, speaking with conviction, praying with fervor. Every gesture, every smile, every whispered prayer was orchestrated to inspire hope. He walked from one side of the stage to the other, his gold watch catching the sunlight, his voice rising and falling in perfect cadence. The audience hung on every word, but among them there was a ripple, subtle at first, barely noticeable, a change in the current of energy that ran through the tent. Through the crowd, a man moved quietly, deliberately, jeans, an old, well-worn jacket, hands relaxed at his sides. No entourage, no flashbulbs, no microphones, just a presence, calm, undeniable, and focused. Clint Eastwood. A few in the crowd caught sight of him immediately. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Is that Clint Eastwood?" "No way. Here?" The tension grew as the murmurs traveled. Phones were raised. Cameras turned. But Clint didn't react to the attention. He walked steadily toward the stage, his eyes fixed on Benny Hinn. Benny noticed him then, a figure cutting through the crowd with such quiet authority that it was impossible to ignore. The preacher's confident grin faltered for the briefest instant. He had seen the famous, the powerful, the wealthy, even the controversial. But there was something about this man that unsettled the usual order of things. Eastwood stopped a few feet from the stage. He looked around, not at the cameras, not at the cheering crowd, but directly at Benny. A stillness fell over the tent, as if the very air had been thickened with expectation. The energy shifted from exuberance to suspense. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. "Brother," Eastwood said, his voice calm, deliberate, and full of authority, "I have come to deliver a message, not from me, but from him above." The words were simple, but their weight hit the room like a bolt of lightning. Benny, who had commanded attention for decades, now felt a strange vulnerability. He took a step back, blinking as the preacher's usual certainty wavered. The audience leaned in, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. People in the front rows craned their necks. Phones rose higher. Cameras clicked. Every eye in the tent was on Eastwood, whose quiet presence had instantly become the focal point of the room. No one dared interrupt. The murmurs faded to a heavy silence. Benny tried to speak to regain control. "Brother, what brings you here?" His voice, usually booming and confident, came out smaller, uncertain. Eastwood smiled faintly, not a smirk, but a subtle expression that carried calm confidence. "I was told something last night, a message I must deliver to you." The crowd instinctively leaned closer, as though the words themselves were sacred. Every pair of eyes, every ear, every heart was now attuned to what would come next. The ordinary had shifted into the extraordinary. The air vibrated with anticipation. Even those who had seen miracles before felt their breath catch. They knew instinctively that this was a moment that would be etched in memory forever. The kind of moment that would change lives, that would ripple through hearts long after the last note of prayer had faded. And then, in that tension-filled pause, everyone sensed it. The moment before revelation. The instant when fate, faith, and courage would collide. Clint Eastwood, a man of Hollywood toughness, stood quietly before Benny Hinn, and the room held its breath, waiting for a message so powerful it would leave no soul untouched. The tent was deathly silent now, the kind of silence that presses on the chest and makes every heartbeat thunder in your ears. Benny Hinn, the man who had once moved mountains with his words, now stood frozen on the stage. Clint Eastwood's presence had shifted the room's energy, but it was his words, yet calm, deliberate, unwavering, that carried a weight no one could ignore. Eastwood took a single step closer, his eyes never leaving Benny. The crowd instinctively leaned forward, sensing a confrontation unlike any they had witnessed. Clint's voice cut through the quiet like a blade wrapped in silk. "Brother," he began, "I was told something last night. I was told to bring a message to you. A message not of praise but of truth." Benny opened his mouth, hesitated, then closed it again. His usual confidence wavered under the weight of the moment. The preacher had spent decades uplifting others, performing miracles and inspiring faith in millions. And yet here was a man, no microphone, no stage lights, no sermons, delivering a truth so piercing it made the strongest heart falter. "You've healed thousands," Eastwood continued. "You've prayed for kings, ministers, and the sick. But what about your own heart?" The words echoed through the tent like rolling thunder. Some in the audience gasped audibly. Others held their breath, and a few whispered prayers. Benny's hands clenched and unclenched as if trying to anchor himself to reality. Sweat formed on his brow, and the microphone trembled in his grip. "You see," Eastwood said, stepping closer still, "true power isn't in the applause, the fame, or the miracles you perform. True power is in humility. True faith is in surrendering, not commanding." Benny's voice cracked as he finally spoke. I don't understand." "You will," Eastwood replied softly, almost a whisper, yet it cut deeper than any shout. "Sometimes the loudest voice isn't the one that commands a crowd. It's the one that listens to the spirit." The crowd shivered. Cameras shook in the hands of those recording. Even the security team instinctively took a step back, sensing the intensity of what was unfolding. Benny's knees trembled. His usual aura of invincibility, the energy that had carried him through decades of sermons, began to crumble under the weight of this truth. "Brother," Eastwood said, leaning slightly closer, "I didn't come to challenge you. I came to remind you, everything you have, everything you've built, it means nothing if your heart isn't in the right place." "Brother," Eastwood said, leaning slightly closer, "I didn't come to challenge you. I came to remind you, everything you have, everything you've built, it means nothing if your heart isn't in the right place." Benny's hands rose to his face as he staggered slightly. His breathing became shallow. A murmur of concern spread through the crowd, growing louder by the second. People rushed closer, unsure whether to intervene or simply witness the extraordinary moment. And then, slowly, impossibly, Benny Hinn's knees gave way. The microphone slipped from his grasp. The crowd gasped as he collapsed, not out of weakness or illness, but because the sheer weight of the revelation, the undeniable truth delivered by a calm, unassuming man, had overwhelmed him. Eastwood knelt beside him instantly, steady and composed, a pillar of quiet strength. The preacher who had once inspired millions now lay humbled, brought to his knees not by illness but by the undeniable presence of grace and truth. A hush fell over the entire tent. Cameras captured every second. Phones trembled in hands. The sound of someone's whispering prayers filled the space. No one moved, no one spoke. They all understood in that moment that something extraordinary had just occurred. A lesson far greater than any sermon. A power far greater than any stage. A message far deeper than words could carry. The tent was wrapped in an almost sacred silence. Benny Hinn lay on the stage trembling, his breath shallow but steady. The microphone lay forgotten beside him, its faint hum the only sound. Every eye in the audience was locked on the scene, their hearts racing, their minds struggling to process what had just happened. The man who had commanded attention for decades, the preacher who had performed miracles, healed the sick, and inspired millions was now on his knees, utterly human, utterly humbled. Whispers spread like wildfire at first, then grew into audible murmurs. "Did you see that? He just collapsed." What did Clint Eastwood say to him? Some pulled out their phones, hands shaking, recording the scene, knowing they were witnessing a moment that would be replayed countless times online. Others simply sat, unable to move, unable to speak, holding their hands together in prayer. The energy in the tent had shifted from excitement to awe, from anticipation to reverence. Eastwood remained kneeling beside Benny, calm and composed, his presence a stabilizing force amid the storm of emotion. His voice was low, almost imperceptible as he whispered words of encouragement. There was no spectacle, no grand gesture, no attempt to take credit, just quiet support, a steady hand, a reminder that sometimes strength is silent. The crowd couldn't help but react. Some wept openly, tears rolling down faces that had come seeking miracles but were now witnessing something far deeper. The power of humility, the undeniable force of truth. The staff on stage were frozen, unsure whether to step forward or honor the gravity of the moment. Security personnel glanced at one another, silently debating intervention, but they didn't move. Even they seemed to understand that this was not a moment for interference, but for witnessing. A group of young volunteers near the front whispered among themselves. "I've never seen anything like this. He's just lying there." "Yeah, but it's different, isn't it? There's respect. Something bigger happening here." People in the back rows craned their necks, standing on tiptoe to get a better view. The camera phones captured every detail. The slight tremble of Benny's hands, the calm, unwavering focus of Clint Eastwood, the silent prayers of the audience. Every movement felt like part of a story unfolding in slow motion, a story no one present would ever forget. Then, as if the moment demanded it, the tent seemed to hold its breath even tighter. A few in the crowd looked around at each other, eyes wide. They knew something extraordinary had just occurred. It wasn't a miracle in the traditional sense, not a healing, not a dramatic manifestation, but a revelation, a lesson, a reminder that true strength comes not from fame, not from power, but from humility and grace. Even Benny Hinn, lying there, understood the weight of the moment. He wasn't struggling to rise because of physical weakness. He was overwhelmed by the clarity of the truth delivered to him. The message Clint Eastwood had brought wasn't just for him, it was for everyone present. A lesson in humility and listening and faith. People leaned closer, some whispering prayers, some simply staring in disbelief. The silence was heavy, profound, almost sacred. The moment stretched, seemingly suspended in time. And in that suspended silence, every person in the tent realized that they were witnessing more than a sermon. More than a performance. They were witnessing a turning point. The whispers grew softer as realization dawned. The audience understood that this was a lesson they would carry forever, that even the powerful can be humbled, and that true authority doesn't shout, it guides quietly. Clint Eastwood remained kneeling beside Benny, the calm center in a storm of emotion. The crowd waited breathless for what would come next. They knew without a doubt that the revelation, the true messaging was about to unfold, and no one, not a single soul, would ever forget it. The tent remained silent, the kind of silence that pressed down on every soul present. Benny Hinn lay on his knees, still trembling, his eyes glistening with a mix of awe and understanding. Clint Eastwood remained beside him, calm and unwavering, a quiet force that had shifted the energy of the entire room. The crowd could feel it, that something extraordinary was about to be revealed. Clint stood slowly and, for the first time, raised his voice, steady but soft. "The message I bring isn't mine," he said. "It comes from him who sees all hearts, who knows all intentions. It's not about power, fame, or applause. It's about humility, about surrendering to what is greater than ourselves." A murmur ran through the audience, then grew into a wave of whispers. People leaned forward. Phones were raised. Everyone wanted to capture this moment, but no recording could fully convey the intensity of what was happening. Benny's voice shook as he finally spoke, struggling to find words. "I've always believed I was serving, guiding, healing, but now I see I've missed the most important part." Eastwood nodded slightly. "It's not about what you give others for recognition. It's about what you give when no one is watching, when your actions come from the heart and not the stage." The crowd hung on every word. Some wept openly, others clasped their hands in silent prayer, and a few simply stared, unable to process the magnitude of the revelation. Then, Clint turned to face the audience. "Look around you. Faith isn't measured by the number of followers or the applause you receive. It's measured by the lives you touch quietly, humbly, without seeking credit." And the truth is, even the greatest of us can be reminded of this lesson in unexpected ways. The tension in the tent broke like a dam. People began whispering, gasping, nodding in agreement. Benny slowly stood, his knees still shaky, his hands pressed together in reverence. Tears streamed down his face as he addressed the crowd. "Today, I've been reminded that even the strongest among us need guidance. Even those who heal need to be healed in spirit." The audience erupted in applause, not just for Benny, but for the lesson that had unfolded before their very eyes. Cameras clicked, phones recorded, but more importantly, hearts changed. People weren't just witnessing a collapse. They were witnessing transformation, a shift from ego to humility, from spectacle to truth. Clint Eastwood stepped back, his work done. Yet before leaving the stage, he spoke one final line, directed both at Benny and the crowd. "Remember this. The greatest power is silent. The strongest message is humble, and the deepest faith speaks even when no one listens." The crowd moved beyond words, erupted in cheers, applause, and prayers. And here's where I want to hear from you. Comment below. Did this story touch your heart? Have you ever witnessed a moment that changed everything for you? Type Amen if you believe true humility is the greatest strength. Even Benny Hinn, now composed, smiled through his tears. "I've learned a lesson today that I'll carry for the rest of my life," he said, turning to the audience. "And I hope each of you can carry it too. Humility, faith, and love above all else." The energy in the tent was electric but different now. Calmer, wiser, more reflective. People left not just inspired but transformed. They had seen power, fame, and influence humbled in front of their eyes. They had witnessed Clint Eastwood, quiet, steady, and unassuming, deliver a message that no sermon, no stage, no showmanship could ever replicate. And for the viewers watching this story, remember, greatness isn't shown in spectacle, it's shown in truth. Comment your thoughts below. Did Clint deliver the message the right way? Fire a comment or type respect if you believe in humility over pride. The revival tent, once buzzing with excitement and energy, had transformed into a sanctuary of reflection. Benny Hinn slowly rose to his feet, still trembling, but there was a new light in his eyes. One that came not from pride or authority, but from humility and understanding. The audience watched in awe, not simply at his recovery, but at the profound change that had taken place before their very eyes. Clint Eastwood remained beside him, calm and steady, a quiet reminder that true strength does not demand attention. He said nothing further, letting the moment speak for itself. The crowd, sensing the closure of this extraordinary encounter, remained hushed, every person processing the gravity of what had just unfolded. Benny took a deep breath, his voice shaky at first, but growing stronger with each word. "I've spent decades preaching, performing miracles, guiding countless people. And yet," he paused, looking around the tent at the thousands gathered, "I never fully understood the lesson I was meant to learn today. It's not about the applause, the fame, or the influence. It's about the heart." He looked toward Clint, gratitude evident in his expression. "Thank you, sir. Not for the message you brought to me, Aunt, but for reminding me of the truth I had forgotten."
Clint gave a slight nod, the quiet acknowledgement of a man who understood the power of action over words. He didn't linger, didn't seek recognition. He had delivered the message, and now, like a shadow slipping back into the light, he stepped away, letting Benny and the audience absorb the moment. The crowd began to respond, softly at first, then with growing intensity. Applause filled the tent, not just for Benny Hinn's recovery, but for the lesson that had transcended spectacle. Some wept openly, others clasped their hands together, bowing their heads in prayer, while many simply stared, their hearts deeply moved. Every person in that tent understood that they had witnessed more than a sermon. They had witnessed a transformation, a shift from ego to humility, from pride to reverence. Benny continued, his voice firm and full of emotion. Today I learned that power without humility is empty. Influence without heart is meaningless. And faith without true surrender is incomplete. I have been reminded, in the most extraordinary way, that no matter how high we rise, we are all accountable to something greater than ourselves. He turned toward the audience, gesturing to each section of the tent. You've all seen this moment, and I hope it serves as a reminder. We must treat every person, every moment, with respect, compassion, and humility. Because one day, someone may remind us, gently, quietly, of the truth we have overlooked. As the applause swelled again, Benny stepped off the stage, walking among the audience, shaking hands, exchanging nods, and silently reflecting on the lesson that would shape the rest of his life. The people around him sensed the change. They could see it in the way he smiled, the way he moved, the sincerity in his words. Clint Eastwood, now at the edge of the stage, gave a final, almost imperceptible wave before disappearing into the crowd. His presence, though brief, had left an indelible mark, a reminder that true authority lies not in dominance, but in guidance, humility, and courage to speak truth when it matters most. As the crowd began to disperse, a soft murmur of gratitude and reverence filled the air. The story of that day, a Hollywood legend delivering a divine message, a preacher humbled, and hearts transformed, would live on far longer than any sermon, any miracle, or any spectacle. And for everyone watching this story, remember, true strength isn't shown in what you command, but in what you inspire. Humility, respect, and faith, these are the legacies that last forever. The tent had emptied, but the echoes of that extraordinary morning lingered like a quiet, powerful hum. Benny Hinn's voice, once commanding the crowd, had softened, replaced by humility and reflection. Clint Eastwood had departed quietly, leaving no trace but the indelible lesson he had delivered, a reminder that true power is silent, and the deepest impact often comes without spectacle. As people walked away, conversations buzzed, but with a different tone. Instead of discussing miracles or performances, they spoke about the lesson they had witnessed, the importance of humility, respect, and the courage to speak the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may seem. They understood that greatness isn't measured by fame or applause, it's measured by the heart. Benny Hinn, still on the stage, looked out at the empty rows, reflecting on the transformation he had undergone. For years, he had believed that miracles defined his power, that influence defined his legacy. But now he knew, the truest strength lies in the unseen moments, in the lessons that humble us, in the quiet reminders that point us back to what truly matters. He turned to the audience, speaking now not as a preacher commanding attention, but as a man who had learned alongside them. Remember this, he said softly, respect isn't something you show only to those who can give you something in return. True respect, true faith, is shown to everyone, especially when no one is watching. Because one day, the person you underestimate may be the one who teaches you the most. The message was clear, resonant, unforgettable. And then came the call to action, a bridge between story and real life, between viewers and reflection. Type respect in the comments if you believe humility is the greatest strength. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. And tell me, where are you watching from? I want to thank every kind soul personally. The crowd, both in the tent and watching through screens across the world, felt the power of this lesson. It wasn't about Benny, it wasn't about Clint Eastwood, it was about the principle that would stay with them forever. Quiet strength, humility, respect, and faith had triumphed over ego, pride, and spectacle. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden light over the empty tent, one truth remained: the most profound moments are often the simplest. The most enduring lessons are delivered not with noise, but with integrity. The people who change the world are not always those in the spotlight. Sometimes, they are the ones who show us the way with calm courage and unwavering truth. Remember, greatness isn't measured in applause. It's measured in respect, humility, and the ability to inspire hearts quietly, powerfully, and forever.